Chapter 9. Finding Comforts and Enjoyments. 1860s. Spit and Whittle. Expression for sitting and telling tales. All of them were spittin' and whittling in turn. All men need something to help them manage boredom, pain, and hardships. There wasn't time or money for many things like we find today. Many found things to help them take their minds off their worries for a while. A common and simple pleasure was the use of a plant that the colonist was introduced to by the native Indians. The leafy plant grew well in new ground, and its leaves were gathered and dried. The leaves were rich in nicotine, and when chewed or smoked, it gave the user a relaxing buzz. The Spaniards called it tobacco, and the English who grew it across the South called the recreational plant tobacco. The nightshade plant came from the tropics of South America, and through trading, the Indians had acquired and grew it in their food plots. Two other nightshade plants that gained world fame were the potato and tomato. Maize, corn, became a chief source of grain, and the potato transformed places like Ireland with a new source of food. The use of tobacco took England and France by storm, and tobacco farming gave birth to the attempted Jamestown colony. In time, cultivation and distribution of it made traders rich. The leaves became known as brown gold. In the Ozark Hills in the 1860s, tobacco use was widespread due to farmers' ability to grow their own. By this time, it was used as chew in the jaw or lip and as a smoke in a pipe. Much folklore developed about its medical benefits, and the plant was said to cure many ailments. Tobacco was popular, being used as money when bartering. Often slaves were used to grow and harvest the plant's leaves and to burn them where they were dried. Afterwards, it was processed as plugs or twist for chewing or coarse ground for smoking. Users soon learned it was habit-forming and hard to quit. Rolled leaves into a cigar was the popular smoke for those who wanted to exhibit status and wealth. A man with a cigar was considered to be distinguished. We know Jenny Harness used tobacco because of her admission to it in an interview on her centurion birthday. How early in life she started, we don't know, but it was common for teenage boys and girls to explore the plant and its use. Both Jenny and Billy had come from Tennessee, where there were tobacco plantations. Perhaps she was using it for a cash crop and for pleasure. In years to come, some of her great-grandsons, Earl and Perry Harness, attempted to grow it for a cash crop on Bear Creek. Using tobacco only accelerated for the next 100 years. By the end of the 1860s, we have an account about tobacco's broad use. The chewing of tobacco was well-nigh universal. This habit had been widespread among the agricultural population of America, both North and South, before the war. Soldiers had found the quid a solace in the field and continued to revolve it in their mouths upon returning to their homes. Out of doors, where his life was principally led, the chewer spat upon his lands without offense to other men, and his homes and public buildings were supplied with spittoons. Brown and yellow parabolas were projected to right and left toward these receivers, but very often without the careful aim which made for clean living. Even the pews of fashionable churches were likely to contain these familiar conveniences. The large numbers of Southern men, and these were of the better class, officers in the Confederate Army and planters worth $20,000 or more and barred from general amnesty, who presented themselves for the pardon of President Johnson, while they sat awaiting his pleasure in the ante-room at the White House, covered its floor with pools and rivulets of their spittle. An observant traveler in the South in 1865 said that in his belief, 7/10 of all persons above the age of 12 years, both male and female, used tobacco in some form. Women could be seen at the doors of their cabins in their bare feet, in their dirty one-piece cotton garments, their chairs tipped back, smoking pipes made of corn cobs into which were fitted reed stems or goose quills. Boys of 8 or 9 years of age and half-grown girls smoked. Women and girls dipped in their houses, on their porches, in the public parlors of hotels and in the streets. Jenny Renfro Harness had come from a Scottish family that immigrated to America. The Scots were famous for the spirits they distilled from barley grains. A famous Scots-American distiller in 1820 was John Walker, said to have been a teetotaler. Alcohol was used for medicinal purposes and also for pleasure. In similar ways to tobacco, the settlers into Kentucky and Tennessee soon learned that their corn could be made into liquid gold. They called it whiskey, which is Gaelic for water because of its clarity in the glass, but it was called firewater to native Indians. In Scotland, the grain water was taxed. Therefore, distillers made it at night to hide the smoke of their fires, and it gained the name moonshine. In the 1860s in Arkansas, there were no regulations or enforcements in the hills. It was made in the daylight and simply called shine or white lightning. The hollow across the creek near Jenny's cabin was called Happy Hollow. Later, a school was built there. I've often wondered how it got its name, and concluded it was likely because corn whiskey was made there. Thus, those who exited the holler were said to be happy. Corn whiskey was made from a sour mash, with the corn kernels, and then distilled. The Ozark Hills had the corn, the wood, and the spring water to make good shine, and so it was. Yet the days were coming when the big distillers back east wanted the white oak for its bourbon barrels. Searcy County, with its abundance of white oaks, would experience a boom of logging and cooperage. Regardless of how one felt about whiskey, there came an opportunity that otherwise could not have happened without the whiskey industry. Turning oak logs into cash had not been possible before. Making whiskey or making barrels helped many families survive the worst of times. Jenny would have had some alcohol to use for medicine. Men mostly took up spirits for drink. Few families didn't have someone given to excess. But she was a Christian and understood that drink was to be in moderation. There was a growing divide in America about the manufacturing and consumption of all forms of alcohol, which became known as the temperance movement. While many believed that its use in moderation was acceptable, others wanted complete abstinence and to prohibit the sale of all alcohol. That clash had to wait until the fight between states was over. First, the Methodists under John Wesley, then the Salvation Army under William Booth, along with many Baptist ministers, advocated total abstinence and grouped all alcohol into their list of sins equal to such practices as prostitution and gambling. Legal or not, moral or immoral, moonshine was used by some to relax when taken as a nip. Yet, when nips became swigs, the drunken tried to bury their problems and sorrows. King Solomon had written these words thousands of years before. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to those who are bitter of heart. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Proverbs 31:6-7. Alcoholism ruined many of a man and still does today. All food and all drink are generally to be taken in moderation and with self-control. Add to this problem today the overuse of sugars and drugs, robbing so many of a better life. Jenny took nips of the spirit in her walk toward an unknown and dark world, but I hope her tobacco gave her a little comfort as adverse winds blew against her cabin on Bear Creek. Reflection. Today we enjoy what we call comfort food. It's usually something high in carbohydrates, and the taste seems to give us a bit of satisfaction and comfort. When done in moderation, the side effects are usually minimized. Spirits, foods, and things that calm us are a blessing when we use them properly, but fools are made of those things that have them and pierce their souls through with many pangs. Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Proverbs 25:28. End note. Americans drink an average of 2.3 gallons of pure alcohol a year compared to 7.1 gallons in 1830. From the author's brief research about the American frontier, a tavern was the first public gathering place in a post or settlement. It was a gathering place with multiple uses that could range from a public meeting to a church gathering. In New England, a tavern was often near a church house, and it was sometimes opened for the men to get a snort during the noon hour on Sunday. Some spirits were helpful when attending the long services. Some taverns in Arkansas had overnight accommodations for travelers with meals. It was common for men to find a drink and tobacco at taverns. Other buildings were called a saloon and offered a variety of services and drink. Trading posts offered basic goods and some whiskey to patrons. The first post office in a community often was inside a tavern or store. William Looney Tavern. Shortly after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the Looney family established a farmstead along the banks of the 11-Point River. During the first meeting, held for the Arkansas Territorial Legislature at the Arkansas Post, Looney was elected to be one of the counselors on the committee. Looney served as Justice of the Peace, captain of the local militia, and the financier as well. Looney died as one of the richest men in the nation, part of that being due to his tavern. The tavern was built in 1820s and expanded about 1833, 3 years before Arkansas would become the 25th state admitted to the Union. It's unclear whether the Dog Trot building served as just a tavern or an inn as well, but it did hold Looney's distillery. The distillery produced 400 gallons of apple brandy whiskey every year until Looney's death in 1846.